Almost every major player within the Star Rail story sources their powers from one of the major paths. But one of the biggest mysteries so far is that nobody seems to know what Aeon the Stellaron Hunters follow. While almost all of its members are considered extremely dangerous and galactic-level criminals, none of their actions seem to follow the major paths. There is, however, one path that seems to account for the abilities and perhaps actions of its leader, and that is the path of finality. So is this really the path that these supposed villains venerate? That is what we will explore in this video. What exactly is the path of finality and who is its Aeon? Before we jump into that, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. So far, we have met a total of 3 members from the intergalactic criminal group known as the Stellaron Hunters. While each of them seem to be quite contrasting individuals, all the members of this group follow a plan that has been laid out by their leader, Elio. Elio is said to have the ability to see into the future, but more specifically, he is able to see all the possible branches of future events. From this ability, he seems to have developed a plan or script that the Stellaron Hunters all follow. During Kafka's interrogation, she mentions that the Stellaron Hunters are doing this because it will eventually lead to the best possible future, at least according to Elio. By manipulating very specific events and curating their outcomes, Elio believes he can subtly influence the direction of fate, which will ultimately lead to the future he wants. The big question here is, how exactly does he have this ability? Of the 7 main paths, there really isn't any that represents or could potentially grant this sort of future-seeing ability, which leads me to believe that Elio himself doesn't source this power from the main paths. There is one path that does have characteristics that match his abilities, but it's practically shrouded in mystery: the path of finality. Little is known about this path, but some have speculated that it represents the end of all things, the final point of existence itself, and the unavoidable death and end of the universe. It's likely a representation or manifestation of the idea that all things must end, and the final event for all things will be when reality itself ceases to exist. The path is presided over by the Aeon known as Terminus, who also goes by the moniker of the Shapeless Prince. Much like its path, little is known about Terminus, but the bits and pieces of lore that we get about it mentions that it's a rather unconventional Aeon. While most other Aeons exist in some form within the present, due to its nature of finality, Terminus is said to exist only at the end of time. Its presence within the present timeline is only due to it traveling backwards through time, and why it's described as only an apparition, like a specter that isn't fully materialized physically. As it travels through the universe and backwards in time, Terminus murmurs to itself a prophecy that is destined to be fulfilled. Now, why it's doing this and how it even travels backwards through time is pretty much unknown, but the fact that it originates from an endpoint somewhere in the far future might indicate how it knows things might turn out. Despite its rather obscure nature, much like the other Aeons, there are groups and factions that venerate Terminus and the Path of Finality, and these are the Creed Exarchy and the Omen Vanguards. While they both follow this path, they do so under different reasons. The Creed Exarchy literally pray to Terminus and consider it a deity. Each member eagerly awaits for the moment in time when their god will cross paths with each of them as it travels backwards in time. There is a memory bubble on the Herta space station that talks about a group attempting to communicate with a time-traveling god through some spiritual ceremony, and while it's unconfirmed, it likely references the Creed Exarchy group. The second faction, the Omen Vanguards, view the path and its Aeon slightly differently. You see, the Omen Vanguards believe that Terminus represents the end of the universe and dedicate their lives in deciphering the murmurs of Terminus's obscure words. Each word and sentence uttered by the Aeon is seen as prophecy of things to come in the future, as they believe the Aeon is spouting eventual outcomes as it travels backwards in time. This deciphering of prophecy is what can likely tie Terminus to Elio. While Elio is described to see the future, the way most of his predictions are worded make them appear more as prophecies rather than peering through time itself. I don't think Elio himself is associated with the Omen Vanguards, but it is possible that the methods he uses may be similar, albeit likely more refined. It could be that he was associated with them in the past, but it's difficult to confirm this since we know so little about Elio himself and the Omen Vanguard. Assuming Terminus is who these factions claim he is, then his words may be an indication of things to come, and Elio simply interprets them more accurately compared to the members of the Vanguard. It might also be possible that Elio himself could be an emanator for Terminus, and why he has access to clearer and more numerous prophecies compared to the members of the Omen Vanguard. If Terminus is really interested in bringing about a very specific end to the universe, having someone like Elio acting in the present to set things up would make a lot of sense, and perhaps why he could be an emanator. One thing that does stand out though is that Terminus is said to speak of a prophecy that is destined to happen, while Elio and the Stellaron Hunters seem to want to change what fate has in store, which kind of puts them at odds with each other, assuming these are different endings. It's possible that Elio still uses the path and its prophecies as a way to gain the end he wishes without functionally following the Aeon itself, or perhaps the words of Terminus change when something within the present timelines is altered. We can't know for sure, but it does make it seem like both Elio and Terminus are functionally at odds in terms of their end goals. In addition, if finality does represent the end of all things, it also doesn't seem that Elio is working towards that, but rather an end he himself desires. Despite this, Terminus and the Path of Finality do present the most likely source of power, at least right now, in explaining Elio's ability to peer into the many possibilities of the future. If the finality is ever changing, it would also make sense for Elio to be able to see all possibilities. Now before I end this video, I do want to include one additional thing regarding finality itself, as it's a topic that has been mentioned in Hoyo vs. other game Honkai Impact. In Honkai Impact, the finality is said to be functionally a sentience or will that wields the Honkai, which is assumed to be just imaginary energy. So while the Honkai itself is energy or power or whatever you want to call it, by itself, it isn't capable of doing anything, and only by being controlled or wielded by something else can it affect the universe. This is what the finality is speculated to be. However, as these are two different games, they may not be exactly similar, and the finality we see in Star Rail may be something else entirely. Also, I never personally played Honkai Impact, so my understanding of its lore is shoddy at best. So if you have a better explanation of this, feel free to share it in the comments. In any case, it does seem at least plausible that Elio is a person who can pull power from the Path of Finality and perhaps may even be an emanator. Whether it turns out to be true or not, we would need to wait until more about their plans and lore about Elio himself is revealed. I'll end the video here, and if you found it entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.